there's so much purposeful, really cool stuff that happens in the gameplay as well, up until that point where Oren reaches his hand down to you saying, come, we're going into this thing. Like, it culminates in that moment. It's so exciting. Like, I have goosebumps right now just talking about
really
it
good.
and just thinking about it, because I cannot imagine a single way that could have been done better.
Yeah.
So good.
Last week, we did a video sort of going over some of our favorite video game introductory sequences of all time.
And we also got some really good comments for some other intro sequences that were really good.
There
so are no
many
misses. There are no misses in the comments.
The fun thing about these video topics we've been doing is there's a plethora of stuff. Like, you can't really go wrong, but we have a limit. We can't talk for 7 hours about it, so you got to pick something. And that's kind of what we're doing today too. So we didn't put any Final Fantasy game on that list. We purposefully excluded Final Fantasy because
and Metal Gear Solid 2.
That's true, because we're about to do Metal Gear Solid 2.
Yeah.
But we excluded Final Fantasy because it would have dominated the list too much.
Sure would have.
We wanted to give limelight to other things.
Yeah.
We said we will do in the future a Final Fantasy intros all on its own.
Yes.
And the future is today.
That time has come.
So we're going to do it now.
one week later.
Similarly, guys, this could easily be looked at as you're ranking the Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Okay, that too. You're ranking the Final Fantasy intros, and if you put something at the back, that means it sucked.
But this is relative to Final Fantasy.
This is relative to, again, some of the best intros that have ever freaking been made for a video game. This is a stacked list of great stuff.
Yeah.
So don't look at it that way. I'm just telling you, don't do it. For the most part, we like most of these games a lot. Some of them are our very favorites of all time. And so we're ranking the intros, but it's all pretty darn strong.
Yeah.
So, don't get bent out of shape too much. We're not saying anything here is bad at all.
Right.
I don't think there's a single Final Fantasy intro that I would go look at and go like, that was actually terrible. Point here is most of these are really, really good. And none of these are like horrible. And so just don't look at it that way. But we had to rank them to some degree to put it into a list, which is a format in which we can actually speak about.
Yeah.
So we're going to rank them. Now, Kason and I do have some differences in opinion on like, maybe one should be switched or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like the AP poll versus the coaches poll.
For a top 25.
And like, these teams will be swapped or whatever.
Yeah, but the difference isn't enough for us to have competing lists.
No,
right?
so it wasn't different enough for us to separate them.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. We're just gonna get into it.
Yeah.
So, we're also not going to include the MMOs in this. And that's because they're both mostly like FMV, like CGI sort of cutscenes that then go into a real slow MMO, like, introducing you into the world of an MMO kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're a different animal for almost a different genre of game.
are, and depending on like, did you play this with friends or not? Like that'll affect your experience on the intro. It's almost like apples to oranges comparing an MMO to a traditional RPG.
Yeah.
It almost isn't fair to compare them.
That's the reason. Again, it's not to ignore them. I have played them both. We did a video on Final Fantasy XIV a couple of years ago, so it's not. I know they get left off a lot of things because it's like, they're a little bit outside, but it really is almost a different genre of game that has different expectations and that doesn't really match up well with the others of the single player offline mainline series. So for that reason, we're going to leave them off. I will say though that Final Fantasy XIV, especially now that it's Realm Reborn instead of 14.0.
Oh yeah.
Or 1.0, 14 1.0.
Yeah, the first one.
Those are different. And so it just gets messy. So we're just going to like not touch that in this specific video for that reason.
Yeah.
But they're fine. Okay. At number 15 is
how apt
Final Fantasy 15.
Final Fantasy 15. Now, I actually want to, because I know a lot of people just got upset about this. I want to offer some explanation to why I think the intro is lacking in FF15.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned earlier, right before the show started, that a lot of what was supposed to be the intro went into Kingsglaive, right?
Yeah. If you go back to Versus 13, it's clear that like the first act or the first sort of like big story event was going to be that attack in the city, and you were supposed to have played through that. And I'm sure that the intro, you know, would have involved that to some degree or lead up into that anyways. And well, obviously that was changed, and Final Fantasy 15 changed a lot from what Versus 13 story was going to be.
Yeah, quite a bit.
So,
so they turned what otherwise I think would have been a better intro into their additional media. But I don't just want to focus on Kingsglaive. I thought it was an interesting movie, generally speaking. It probably would have been better as in-game kind of stuff. But the anime, do you remember the anime that they released?
Yeah, Brotherhood,
That was fun. I liked that quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
And the idea of them all kind of going to the bridal, it's like the bachelor.
It's like they're on their way to a wedding.
Yeah.
And it's like, what would you call it? His entourage, his retinue, his like group of bachelors that are with him. His groomsmen on the way to the...
There's an atmosphere through the anime that I actually really liked and that I appreciated a lot. And it's very important to note that the car is working in the anime. And that may have helped to move things along, metaphorically speaking, in a way that when the car is not working, you don't get quite as well at the very beginning of FF15. You have a pretty thrilling kind of scene where Noctis is running towards the capital, the city that's burning, and it's all this, there's all sorts of fire, and you're kind of hiding behind things, and it's very short, it's very brief, but things are burning, things are going crazy. I feel like they added that in on purpose just to spice up the intro.
Some excitement to it.
Because it was lacking right from the very beginning. It's very short, and you don't even really get an idea of what's happening before it's like, okay, now let's jump back in time 10 years, right?
Yes.
Now the car's broke down, and we've got to go to Sid and Cindy's car shop, and that's where the real kind of beginning of the game starts. Now start doing some quests for the townspeople who need help battling the monsters of the wilderness. One thing I did like about it is that area kind of looks like Arizona, like where we grew up.
Yeah.
That whole place, if I was younger and I played FF15, I might have liked it better, because especially when we lived in Arizona, because I would have been able to run out into the desert and pretend that I'm battling monsters because it looks like the same setting. Yeah. But as intros go, I think FF15 deserves to be at the bottom here. It's not as captivating as the other ones we're going to talk about.
Yeah. This is such a weird and just like an example full of caveats and like, because it clearly changed so much over the course of its development.
Right. Yeah.
And was meant to be this, and then it was that. We're talking about like some of the demos, like episode Duskai, which was the behemoth thing. But there was that other one that they did where you played as like young Noctis in the castle or whatever. Yeah, like that squeaky hammer thing you're hitting dudes with. Like they had all these different like possible starting points.
Yeah.
They had a lot of like trailers in the past.
I do remember that one now. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, I thought it was Kingdom Hearts when I first
It felt very Kingdom Heartsy.
Yeah, that's right.
So like there was all of this stuff that you saw before the game came out.
Yeah.
That suggested this long sort of like troubled, maybe a little bit relationship between Noctis and his father. Yeah. There's the whole Kingsglaive movie we just talked about.
Yeah, Kingsglaive.
But like where they ended up starting is the car's broken down, you got to get it fixed.
Yeah.
On their way, I guess they do have the cutscene where Noctis's father sort of, says to him like,
that's right.
He's clearly like not saying what's really on his mind or whatever.
He's like, farewell, son.
Yes, he's saying goodbye to his son forever.
Yeah.
But Noctis doesn't know that.
Yes. That's right. We should touch on that.
And then it kind of like skips ahead to the car's broken down.
It's not a bad intro.
No.
It's not a bad intro.
None of these are bad.
Yeah.
It's just that I think there's just this tinge still with that project of like all this hype for what like it seemed like it was going to be versus what it ended up being, particularly
that's for sure,
at launch. That sort of let a lot of people down. And I'm not trying to factor that all into it, but I'm saying there's some of that that's almost inevitable. But I think you're right that they injected that like flash forward to the Ifrit fight just to have something exciting.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it had like a really strong purpose in being where it was.
It felt a little out of place.
Felt
it's like
yeah.
I just barely started the game and you're already like 10 years ago, let's tell you how we got to this point. And I'm like, tell me who these people are first. I don't actually care yet.
So of all of the ones we're doing today, again, I don't think any of them are bad. I think basically every Final Fantasy game is pretty well polished and at the higher end, even when they're at their lowest, they're still like well-made games.
Yeah.
They're not like horrible outside of like Final Fantasy 14 1.0's launch.
Oh, the Omen trailer too. There was a ton of material.
There was so much expectation.
Arguably, some of that lead-up stuff was more of an intro
than the actual intro. And that's all of that is to say that's why it's at the bottom of the list.
Right. It's like there was a lot to pick from, and this is what they went with.
And it was kind of like, was that really, really the strongest starting point that you had? It was probably more budget. It was probably more like just technicality, like on the technical side, the difficulties of pulling off what they wanted to do. There were a lot of compromises made to that story.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty clear in its intro. All right. Number 14 on the list, we're putting Final Fantasy III.
FF3.
I want to say something real quick about Hironobu Sakaguchi. So I did an interview with him a few years ago, 2020. It was 2020 because the pandemic was at its peak when Fantasian was coming out.
That's right, Fantasian.
And we did a video call, and I had asked him whether in the future maybe at some point I could sit down with him in person, and he seemed hesitant, but I think it's because it was all COVID stuff.
Oh,
it was all like, well, not anytime soon kind of thing. But hopefully we will make that happen one of these days.
He's in Hawaii, right?
Yeah. Well, he's between Hawaii and Tokyo.
Okay.
Goes back and forth all the time. Yeah. And he's in LA a lot too. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have some place that he stays when he's out there.
Yeah.
But point is, I talked to him in that interview about how he creates introductory sequences. I've always been a huge fan. I think it's one of the strongest things he does as a writer and director is his introductory sequences.
Yeah.
So I asked him about how he goes about crafting those. And so I think one of the reasons why Final Fantasy has this reputation for having really great intros is because he focused so much on that as sort of the creator of the series. He actually starts writing with an intro sequence and doesn't really know necessarily where it's going to go from there.
That's a cool way to write.
Yeah, he just writes an intro that he thinks is a cool intro and then builds the story off of its intro.
Well, that's smart because the intro, in some ways, the intro is the foundation of you build a building from the bottom up, right?
Yes.
The first floor is the intro to the edifice. So if you got a good intro, that's what I said in the last week's video. If you've got a good intro, the chances that you have a good game are really high.
Yeah.
Right. So if he's searching and searching for a good intro and then he builds from that, that's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to start crafting a game.
I mean, a lot of people who write, they might have like this sort of overall idea of where they're going with the story. And this is maybe my core theme I'm going to be working off of. And I have these and these and these scenes in mind, and I need to find a way how to like get to those. But I don't know how to start the thing. Like where do I start? I have this whole world maybe even that I've crafted. Where within that world do I begin?
That is my current issue with the book I'm writing right now. But yeah.
So a lot of people build their worlds that way and build their stories that way, and they kind of like struggle to find it. He doesn't have that world in mind yet. He's just writing an introductory sequence to something and just sort of like finds it as he's writing and builds it off of whatever came from that. So it was a really interesting sort of like approach to storytelling. For those of you who are interested, you can go watch that full interview. I'll leave a link in the description or something like that. Super, super fascinating. But I think that's why, at least for him and for the games he directs, they tend to have very strong intros. Yeah. Lost Odyssey, outside of Final Fantasy is a really good example of that. That's one we debated putting on the list last week. So he's very good at that, I think. And so so the NES games, are kind of his start to his career as a director. And so for that reason, I think he got better at his craft as he went along. And so you'll see a lot of these at the bottom, but for the most part, I still think they're really strong.
Right.
Final Fantasy III's starts with the four orphans who are, they're out playing up in the mountains and they fall into a cave and they're trying to just make their way out. The young kids. If you're going off the DS version, they've sort of changed those characters a little bit, but
right. And that was my intro to Final Fantasy III.
Yeah,
was that.
But similar idea. They've fallen into a cave. They're making their way out, and they come across this crystal, which is almost it's almost like a supernatural, godlike sort of entity in the world of Final Fantasy III.
Yeah, the crystal.
They have this sort of contact with the gods.
Yeah, and
are given this mission, and the crystal shatters as the world is falling out of balance. The elements. And they have to gather these pieces. That's what gives them your first four jobs, your first four classes.
That's right, because was this their first FF that was class?
Yes.
A class system?
So they had classes in the first one and in the second one, technically, but they would just work differently. This is where, like, the Final Fantasy class system, as it's known and famous for, was created.
It's more or less what I'm referring to.
Was in FF3.
Was 3.
Though some of those did exist in more primitive forms in the first game. But anyways, so it gave you an introduction to what is now a staple for the series and the Final Fantasy classes or jobs. And it's got really beautiful music and everything like that. But outside of that, I didn't feel like there's really enough going on to justify it being higher.
Yeah. I will say the very first time I saw the DS version of Final Fantasy III was the FMV that plays on the DS. It was the first time that I had seen a cutscene on the DS utilize both screens and give you kind of a vertical experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that game was very well suited to it. But I thought that was brilliant. And it actually it blew me away. I really liked the intro FMV, the flying ships, and the look of FF3 as it was presented on the DS. Of course, I didn't play the NES one till much later, which was basically on the stream with us for the FF16 pre-release stream that we did.
Right.
And even then, I mean, I didn't play it. I just kind of watched it. But yeah, it was interesting. The remake for the DS, they've remade a lot of these games, and they've added these kind of FMV intros. I don't know if that should really count towards the technical intro of the game.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Because in one hand, I could see the argument for it.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it's like, well, this is just like an anime intro.
Right.
A lot of times they just show you kind of random stuff and it's not even necessarily all that relevant to the show.
The FMV was very intriguing. And then the game itself is I don't know, more standard, I guess.
Yeah. So anyways, that's FF3. The next one, we're moving up to number 13, is Final Fantasy II. Now, again, it's kind of like you could put one ahead of the other kind of thing, but I think what was for me at least a little bit more, what drew me in a little bit more to Final Fantasy II was that, you're coming across this battle that's just like unwinnable. You just get wiped out right away.
Yeah.
And you have one, because there's a party of 4 that you have, one of them isn't there when you wake up. So 3 of them were rescued, but one was lost. Leon is gone. So their friend Leon is not with them. And so it built a little bit of like, oh no, what happened to him? A little bit of a mystery they're planting, which is a payoff for later with that character. So I like that element of it, as well as the fact that you kind of get pulled in. You want to join the rebel army. The characters are asking Princess Hilda, can we please join? We want to enlist. No, you're too young. I would never like put children on the front lines like that. And so you end up having to kind of like prove yourself. You go on this mission to find Princess Hilda's like betrothed who is dying and gives you a ring that you take back, and then you kind of prove yourself, and then you're allowed to go on some missions and sort of enlist. And so that intro, again, pretty simple, but I found it to be a little bit more compelling than 3. And so I just sort of like slid that up just one spot because of that.
Sounds good.
But again, very basic in terms of like where these end up going. So at number 12, we have Final Fantasy 13. Now, people are probably gonna be like, how could you rank this one so low? But it's for a very specific reason. And I've talked about this at length in the past on the podcast. In fact, I think I did like a whole episode that was very, very, very long, just on like the intro to Final Fantasy 13 and like breaking it down. It is very exciting. And I think there's certainly like a really interesting world that they're showing you in the intro of 13. I think the music's really cool. I like Hamauzu as a composer a lot. And obviously it's beautiful visually, just fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's, you know, that you got your main character Lightning is sort of fighting all these guards on a train that's like barreling towards a place, and like they have prisoners on there all dressed in these robes that she's like freeing, and she's there trying to find her sister. And so I think it's really exciting. It's very well produced, and it's visually just stunning. I think the only thing that held this back from being a little higher on the list for me was it's sort of like, clumsy is probably too strong of a word, but I'm struggling to think what else the use of terminology that is not like super well defined, that was a bit confusing for a lot of people. They keep talking about the lessee, and they keep talking about this and that, and it's just like, I remember that. They're using those terms over and over and over again, but not really like defining what they are, which sort of created a problem that I don't. If you know my history of talking about Final Fantasy 13, I've given this game a very long, like super, super fair look, where I had lots of other people give me their thoughts on it, and just like tried to really, really like be objective and fair about like breaking that down, and not let my personal feelings get in the way of that long form discussion. But I think it's worth noting that a lot of people didn't like about 13, that in order to learn about certain elements of its world, like what is a lessee, what is this, what is that, you had to kind of rely on going into, I forget what they called it in that game. It was like an archives sort of thing. We have to go read about things a lot. A lot of people didn't like that element of it, and it sort of leaned into that a little bit in its intro. So while it's really exciting and really beautiful and all of this stuff, and while it's like, okay, they're all kind of, you have even more than one scene going on. You have Lightning and Saz over here, and then you have Snow and like his group over here doing their thing. It's kind of got a lot going on that all converges, which I think is pretty neat. And then they all end up getting branded, and all of that. So by the Falsi, which is another term. But I think the only thing, again, it's like the one thing holding it back was that it was kind of a lot. Like right up front in terms of terms and things like that. And some people were kind of like, dude, what is this? You keep saying this word, but I don't know what that means. And you had to rely on like an archive to go figure out what it was. So they struggled, I think, a little bit just to like put sort of like a complex world, which I do think Final Fantasy 13's world, and I do like its concept of gods and how the gods sort of enslave the people and the way they go about that, and then the mission or the focus that they give them. I like those elements of it, but it wasn't like a nice, smooth, gradual sort of learning about these things. It was a little bit rough in trying to like put those pieces together for a lot of people. So it's again, all of these intros I think are pretty great.
They're all good intros, and 13's is a good intro. It is very exciting. But it does feel a bit lacking. It's like something's missing.
It's just you're a fish out of the fishbowl. A little bit. And there's just a lot of terminology that they're talking about. Again, I'm not advocating for as you know dialogue. We talked about this with Vagrant Story, right? This is hard to pull off. Which is why that game's intro is so impressive. They're talking about this term, risk breaker, or this or that, and they're not talking about it in a way where it's like, let's pause to tell the audience what that means. So Final Fantasy 13 does not use dialogue like that, which I think is a good thing. But it's just a little bit more difficult based on how it was written and how the scenes play out to like really understand that stuff for some people.
Gotcha.
That's all I'm saying. All right. Let's move on to number 11, which is Final Fantasy VIII.
8.
We also talked about this at length in our podcast series, so go there for the full
very much so. This does not mean we think 8 is a bad game, people. No. It is a very good game, in fact. Final Fantasy VIII was a game that was often mentioned in the comments of our last video, actually last week, of greatest intros to video games. There were several people who said, I think FF8 has the best intro. And I think I might know, at least in part, why. I did not play this game when it came out. But when it came out, that FMV, even compared to Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII,
impressive.
Really, really impressive.
And the music's amazing.
it had I experienced this when, how old would I have been? 12, 98, 99, I maybe 13. Yeah. I would have been blown away, absolutely. And it probably would have colored my perceptions going into the future of the nostalgia I feel for that game. But having played it 20 years after it came out, basically my first playthrough, and then playing it again for the podcast, and it's not just the FMVs. We're talking about the intros, like basically something like the first hour of the game or so, something like that. You know, it's the sequence that happens, right? And that intro is, while it's very beautiful, and they used all the capabilities of the CDs on the PS1 extremely well, it then leaves off and drops you into the hospital, right? With is it Katawaki? And then there's mystery, there's intrigue, and then there's a girl there. Like what they're doing at the beginning of the gameplay is introducing you to a relationship, which is what the game's actually all about, right? And the intro also has a lot of really cool symbolism, which I thought was very good. The flower field and all of that kind of stuff. Like it hints at things that are going to happen later on, and it compresses them into that FMV. But then when you're playing the game, it's really slow at the beginning. And I love the environment. I love the seeds. I love Balan Garden.
The music.
I love the characters.
Yeah.
I love that there's literally a T-Rex in Balan Garden. I think it's great. I love so much about the game. But there's a huge disconnect between the end of the FMV and the beginning of the game, which I don't feel in other games that utilize these same high quality FMVs that also are Final Fantasy games. I don't get that same abruptness and that same like, wait, what's going on? Wait, was that a dream? No, that wasn't. What was that? We actually got hurt. Okay, I see what's going on now. Sort of. Part of that was real. The other part of it was just abstract, and I guess I'll figure it out later. It left me with a lot of questions that really aren't answered until the very end of the game.
Yes.
But that I forgot I had even asked those questions as the game progresses. I kind of forgot about the FMV as the game kept going. And then at the end, after the game ended, I was able to go back and watch the intro FMV again. And then I was like, oh, I kind of get where this was going. I get it. But as an FMV, as an intro, the intro to FF7, for example, I was thinking about throughout the entire game. The intro to FF8, the FMV, I kind of stopped thinking about it after about 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, and here's the reason why. Because you don't have enough context to really even place, okay, that was related to this, that was it,
right,
because it is almost dreamlike in its presentation.
It is, absolutely. And to that end, it could have been like a trailer, like this is a game trailer, and here's
that's
the
exactly
actual beginning of the
game.
It. Yeah,
that's exactly how I feel about
it. But we might have even said that in our podcast.
We did.
Yeah.
It feels like the kind of intro you would see on a start screen before you like press start.
Yes.
And it just sort of like plays a thing that just kind of has some great music and gives you some flashes of the kinds of things you can expect.
Right.
But it's not that. That is a whole different thing where they have the opening credits that sort of like play with just different like images of characters. And then you actually start the game, and this is where it begins. So this is made by the same team, the same sort of like
from 7, right?
Well, 7 is where after Final Fantasy 7, the Final Fantasy team sort of branched into 3 different teams. You had like the MMO team, you had Kitase's team that made Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 10, and then on to Final Fantasy 13. And then you had Sakaguchi's team that went on to do FF9 after FF7. So there was a little bit of some different philosophies on like how to design the series and all that stuff we went over in FF8, the full podcast. But they have a style kind of to how they do things. And so, you know, it's one thing to sort of like sit here and say like, well, that style or that taste might not be to my liking as much as the other or something like that. That's not what I'm trying to get at. So I just want to make that clear. But their style is one in which, well, Kingdom Hearts has a lot of it too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of vagueness and sort of like this, sort of like mystery behind this like veil where they create, I think what they're really going for is like, they want you to feel an emotion while you watch this.
And after I played the game, I do feel that emotion now.
Yeah.
When I watch that intro FMV, I can feel it, right? I really can.
It's like the goal here is to create an emotion.
Yeah.
And they're going to use their images and sound and text to create that emotion.
I see.
It may not necessarily be their goal to like have this make the most sense in the world.
And that, you know what, that's probably the exact, I think you're right on with that.
Yeah.
That they're like, we're crafting a feeling here, and it really clicked with a lot of people.
Yeah. So there's a lot of images there that are clearly not meant to be like, this literally happened.
Yeah.
Like you have one side of it where you have
some
Cypher.
Of it is, though.
You have Cypher and Squall having a battle. They don't want you to know that this is a training. You think, oh, these are enemies fighting each other, right? Which is fine.
But that's
literally happening.
Yeah.
What's not literally happening is his sword falling like from out of the low atmosphere or something and like slamming down into the ground. Like that's just a cool image.
Yeah.
Right. And so it kind of hangs in between this place of being like the anime intro or anime like opening, which is very abstract imagery and all just about like, here's the feeling that we want to create with this anime, and here are some images and just cool stuff.
Yeah,
that
and then
give
people
you that
just
feeling,
go with it. Yeah,
but you're not meant to like literally take from that. This is what's happening in the story.
Right.
So, Final Fantasy VIII's
That's a good analogy.
Intro, it crosses the line between those two things simultaneously.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, which image here am I meant to like, okay, that's literally happening, or that's literally the story, and this is just a really cool image they came up with.
Right.
And so you almost get to the end of that, and at least for me, feeling like that's just anime intro. But then it's like, no, there's actually like really important elements of that are leading you into the story that are like key context to understand where this is going. And so it can be a little bit confusing there, but I think for a lot of people that can be some of the fun of it, is sort of like finding which is which.
But that's something that is second playthrough, third playthrough, fourth playthrough kind of stuff. And maybe that's why we maybe knocked FF8 down the list a little bit. I think it's a really good intro, but if you're just opening the game and this is your first experience with it, it's almost superfluous. It's almost like you don't really even need that. And then the real intro.
This is cool. Yeah. Don't think about it too much right now. Just like we'll get to that later, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas other intros in the series, I think that they really cement like, we're going to introduce you into a world, and these are really, really important. Like our theme, our message is all over this. And you're playing the game right away, and it's exciting gameplay. Whereas, like you're saying, this is more just a movie you watch, and then you're kind of just at school for about an hour.
Which I love that, by the way. And it reminds me a lot of the intro to Persona 5, albeit, in my opinion, Persona 5's intro is really good. But you're playing the game a lot more in Persona 5 at the beginning. And then, okay, now I'm just a student at school, right? Yeah. Whereas for FF8, you're just kind of watching, and this was the FMVs of the time. They really were something special, really cool. But you're not playing throughout that, and then when you are playing, you're just a kid at school. Which I don't even want to sound like I'm knocking it.
I don't want to knock it
when you're just a student at school.
Balam Garden.
I liked it too.
I like Balam Garden,
but if we're going to compare it to the games above it,
it
becomes clear.
Is this like a more effective intro at getting me like really invested in where this story's going?
Exactly.
Again, it's not bad. It's just maybe not quite as effective in that to those ends.
Yes. Very good.
That being said, we did make an argument in our FF8 podcast
over what would be better,
what might have been a better starting point. And I said starting at the Dalit mission could have been that. And I made my whole argument for that. And it turns out one of the demos for Final Fantasy VIII was essentially the Dalit mission. So to some degree, they agreed with that because they released a demo where that's where like, you start.
Let's do that one.
Because they know we need our player to be playing the game in a demo that will give them an idea of what to expect from the full game.
Yeah.
But then when the game starts, it's a lot more running around talking to people, and you're in class, and you know, like building maybe this little bit of this rivalry between Cypher and Squall, behind the scenes kind of stuff.
Which is also fun.
It's fun.
It's so much fun.
But to some degree, they knew if we're going to do a demo, the Dalit mission's where to start.
Yeah.
And my opinion still, even after all the debates we had with our audience during that podcast, was I still think that would have been a stronger intro.
It would have been a stronger intro. And then the thing is, once you go through that, it would be difficult to then be like, oh, you're just a student at school now after that mission,
part.
Which they really wanted you to have that experience of, I'm just a student at school. Things are nice. It's a Garden of Eden kind of situation. And so I get that, but there are costs that come with that, which is, well, the intro is less engaging and less relevant to the content of the game going forward. But that's fine. I love it for what it is.
Yeah. All right. At number 10, we have Final Fantasy I. I think seeing you react to this back when we did our big like Final Fantasy stream where we played like all the game intros in a row.
You guys can see it. It's a live stream.
It was interesting for you who had never played the NES version. Never. Were not really that familiar with it. Even in when did the game come out? 2022?
Yeah.
Even in 2022, you were still just like that. There was something special in that.
Very much
and
so.
I very much agree.
And it's the first one, right? This was the first one, because you mentioned Sakaguchi got better as time went on. But this one, I feel like FF1 is something that he had in his mind for a while. Sure. Right? That this is something that he was like, okay, I've been thinking about it. Let's do it. Like, we're all the cards on the table. Like, let's go all in, all the chips. Like, poof, we're making this game, and this is how we're going to do it. And I would mostly say that because FF1's intro is better than maybe like 2 and 3, the ones that came after it, I feel like maybe it had a little bit more thought put into it. But one of the coolest parts about it was the design of the castle and the courtyard and the place that you're in. For the NES, this was really good. Like, this was, I think, just beyond what a lot of the other games that I'd played for the NES. This was beyond what I thought the NES was even capable of. It looked really good, and I was just blown away by that as well.
I just wanted to add to this real quick. Koichi Ishii. He's a developer that, Sakaguchi, I think, rightfully gets the credit for being the father of the Final Fantasy series and all this. Yeah. But it's actually true that while Sakaguchi was finishing another game, I think it was Rad Racer or something like that, leading before they were done with that and could come over and start on Final Fantasy, Koichi Ishii was the first developer to begin like the planning of Final Fantasy I. And a lot of the ideas, some of its best ideas, were actually his.
Oh, really? Good. Well, hey.
So, like,
give him
some of this stuff
then.
with the intro and the way that links to the ending of the game and things like that were his idea.
Ah, very interesting. Very good.
His idea of making Final Fantasy this, like, world of dioramas. That they're supposed to look like little dioramas with a little person running through them.
Yeah.
That was Koichi Ishii's idea.
Very cool.
And so, like, he talks about like the airship having like the shadow that it casts on the ground.
Yeah.
This was all part of making it look like a little world of dioramas that you're looking into and sort of.
Yeah.
So, like, I just want to give him his due credit that, like, his part of the planning, and he did a lot of the art for the characters, like the pixel art and stuff was all him.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, like
the mountains, was it his idea to design the mountains so that
as they're crystal rather than like normal mountains. They're white because they're supposed to be crystalline.
Koichi Ishii.
So Koichi Ishii had a lot of like influence on FF1, and I think the intro, to a large degree, is kind of his brainchild as well.
Very nice.
So I just wanted to mention that. But additionally, I do really like how you get that first mission with Garland. And you go take him down, and it feels like you defeated the Dark Lord within the first hour of the game. It's you beat the final boss right at the beginning.
Right.
That's crazy. But it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the story. And this plays in the whole loop nature of like where this ends up going by the end. But you have that shot, which is just iconic, as the heroes head out and they're looking over the lake at the castle in the distance. And you have like the text and the Final Fantasy theme, which ended up becoming the series theme.
Yeah, which I love. It is my favorite. My favorite song in Final Fantasy is that.
Yeah. And there's this real sense of adventure that the intro of FF1 sort of induces in its audience is just kind of irresistible to me.
Yeah.
Of the NES games, and I know FF3 is widely considered the best of the three for many, many good reasons, but FF1 is the one I go back and play over and over again, not FF2 or FF3. And it's largely because of that feeling. And I felt like as we were going through that, you felt that, and we're like, wow, that's so good.
I did. It's an adventure, and it's a swashbuckling adventure, and I just want that's what I want.
Classic feeling of just like the spirit of adventure is so strong in the beginning of FF1, and it's just captured in a way that I don't even think any other game in the series does quite like it does.
I was blown away, and it was what, 1987?
1987.
87. I mean, you got to give props to a game to pull off something like that early in video games, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knew what they were doing. You look at the age of most of the developers; they were younger than us for sure. They were like in their 20s, and they were making this stuff. Like, you know, they were inventing the tools that people for the next 50 years would be using. You know, and they were doing it all back in the 80s. And this is the stuff that they came up with, and it's amazing.
Yeah. All right. At number 9, we put Final Fantasy V.
And this is one of the small petty squabbles where I would have put 1 over 5. But you know,
I think that's actually pretty valid. In fact, maybe we just do that now.
Well, I don't care.
But
that much.
Final Fantasy V's intro, I think, is really strong. Again, it's more like similarly to how I talked about Vagrant Story last week, being so good because of its direction. Right. Yeah. It's not necessarily like Vagrant Story's mystery is so mind blowing and just like, whoa, I got to find out what's going on with that.
Right.
It has good mysteries, but it's more like masterfully directed in a way that like uses the technique of, well, I guess I'll just call it filmmaking, the way it uses the camera, the way that it uses, the way it's written in paste, and like the way all of that comes together with the music. It is masterful in how it just like draws you into the world.
Yeah.
I feel like Final Fantasy V, while not on the level of Vagrant Story, is similar in how the music and like the timing of it all. And this even goes back to a lot of the interviews that I read back when I was doing the Final Fantasy retrospective series. This is the game where Kitase was brought on as an event planner. So he and Sakaguchi were working together to direct the event scenes. So like the cutscenes of the game and things like that.
Which is where a lot of the story takes place.
Yeah, and they sort of like they passed responsibility for this scene and this thing, and they had this sort of like rivalry between each other during the development of this game to one up each other. He did this, I'm going to do this, and like make the scene. So they were trying to like make each other's scenes
fun, though.
Better than the other.
Huh, interesting.
And Sakaguchi was responsible for the intro. And I feel like that's, again, where he's really strong. I feel like he does a really good job with introductory scenes. And so it's more of this, the feeling and the sense and the timing of like how the music works with the images, because we're passing it between different characters. These are 4 separate characters that are going to come together and end up being like the main party of the game, the 4 characters. So you have like Lena when it leads off, and you're just kind of coming down on the castle, and you have the dragon there.
Yes.
And
that was good.
Her father is leaving, right, to go find out what's going on, because the world's elements are just totally out of whack. The wind basically stops blowing.
Yeah,
and King Tycoon was going to like check this out, and
there was
Lena,
a meteor or something.
The meteor falls after that. And that's where Galuf, shows up or whatever. But anyways, the point is, it's like if you watch that and you're paying attention to when the music, what's happening in the musical flares on screen in a way that you very, very rarely saw in games like at this time. Okay. You usually just had like a looping music in the background.
It's just playing. Yeah.
It was movies and films where the score was written to like the BPM, the beat of the music is written for impactful moments of the film.
Yeah.
Like, right. That's like a whole part of film scoring. And in games, you didn't have that so much. It was just write a loop.
Because you don't know when people are going to push A when they finish reading the dialogue.
And this is an example where it's timed. it's timed with the music, and it's just really strongly directed. And for me, it creates like a really mysterious feeling with like what happened with King Tycoon, what's going on with these crystals. It's kind of like the same story as Final Fantasies 1 and 3.
Well, I was going to say Final Fantasy V does also deliver that spirit of adventure as well, I think, in a pretty fun way, you know.
For sure. And then, you know, it brings all of these characters together. There's this big meteor that falls, and Bartz goes and like discovers that these two other characters are in trouble. Oh, let me help you out. And then you've got, of course, this other pirate character. Is it Lena? Lena is her name? No. Lena's the main princess. What's her? Ferris. So yeah, you have like Ferris and the pirates, and you kind of really quickly like come into that scenario. But there's sort of like I think like you're saying, a spirit of adventure and like a swashbuckling or just like this fun sense of adventure.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different from, say, your Final Fantasy 4s and 6s.
Or 6,
which are a lot more
somber, I think.
Melancholic, real serious, dealing with some dark issues.
Right, kind of depressing.
And so it has sort of that, like,
even the color palette, I feel like in 5 is a little much brighter and more saturated. Yeah. Whereas 6, it's a lot more muted and tinted.
It sets a different tone that almost had this pendulum swing between each game in the series during that period of its history, where it would go this way, then it would go this way, then it would go this way.
Right, and, from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6.
It's just a lot of fun, and it's just a fun adventure that you just get drawn into right away, and it's just really well directed. So
I appreciate that stuff.
That's why we placed it there. Now, I think we've gone through. No, not quite half. We're at number 8 now. So Final Fantasy 12, we put at number 8. And I love Final Fantasy 12's intro.
12's intro is really good.
You said that you had a couple of things that you felt like held it back from the others. Maybe we lead off with that.
Okay.
And then I'll kind of like come in.
So there's a little bit from, like, for instance, with Final Fantasy VIII, where I love the intro so much, but when you get into the gameplay, I felt like there was a little disconnect, and then I kind of forgot about it moving forward. There's something like that with FF12, and it has something to do with the fact that the character you're playing as is Rex?
Rex, yeah.
Rex.
R-E-K-S.
Yeah, Rex, exactly. Love it. As if Japanese already isn't hard enough to, like, they had to spell it wrong. Okay, fine. But I suppose they didn't want it to be R-E-X because that means king. Or,
sure. Depending on.
Okay, so he's just a young recruit, right? He's not, he's a soldier, but he's not like the leader of the group, right?
Yes.
He's there. He's fighting. He becomes, after everyone else dies, he's kind of, what's left. But you're playing as somebody who you never see or play as throughout the rest of the game, right? And that right there, almost that alone explains why I have some misgivings about placing 12 higher. It's a very fun intro, very exciting, perfect intro for the game. I wish I was playing a more relevant character in it, as opposed to...
It's almost like that's the whole complaint with the whole game for a lot of people.
And then Vaughn. That's what I was going to say, though. Like, it does. It's like first Rex, then Vaughn. The game begs to be played as Bosch or Ash, whereas you're actually playing it as Rex and Vaughn.
Yeah.
And that's one of the frustrating parts of the game in general, especially after that dope intro happens. And then it's like, okay, cool. That was really fun, right? That was really cool. Okay, here's who you're actually playing the game as. His name's Vaughn. He likes to kill rats in the sewer, and he's not the most useful person in the world. So anyways, enjoy having fun. It's almost like, remember when we talked about the intro to Nier? How it's fun that they gave you a taste of the power that you'll have at the end game, right? Like end game spells, high level kind of magic that you're working with. And then you go back, but you are still the same character, right? You are still the same person in the same dilemma. You just have to now build up your skills. I get that. I'm not criticizing the fact that you are Rex and then you're Vaughn, because it's not like Rex was like the best fighter in the world anyways. But it does show you aspect of the gameplay and introduce you to character and war and high-level politics and palace drama and all that stuff in a way that is kind of, there's a huge sharp cutoff, and then the rest of the game feels very disconnected to that, as you're then playing as Vaughn. That's probably my biggest criticism and why it doesn't rank higher. However, do not mistake that for me not liking FF12. I really like FF12. I was actually blown away when I first played it. I was like, how come people don't, and I hadn't played 10 at the time. I played 12 before 10, actually. And I was like, how come people don't say 12 is one of the best of all time, right?
Yeah.
But I love it. And the intro is very good too, but there's a bit of a disconnect, which is why I've got to drop it just a little bit in the ranking.
So for me, and this is actually part of the reason why the Final Fantasy retrospectives are not live anymore. There's a lot of outdated information.
I see.
But one of the things that was sort of propagated for a long time was Matsuno's original sort of like draft or what do you call it? Treatment. For the game.
Because he dropped out
as a main character. And that there was this push for a younger, sort of like teenage age character.
And part of that was backlash to Vagrant's story and not selling so well, like within the company.
That was the narrative.
That's what
rumor for the reason behind this, which has been contested in more recent times. And so, all I'm trying to say is that there's that was used as an explanation for. Well, Matsuno would have done it this way, but the reason we have to play as this Vaughn kid or some seemingly a character whose reason for being a part of the events is not as strong as one of these other characters that feel more like they should have been the main character is because of this. And what I'm saying is, I think that was like fans trying to like work through like explaining in their own heads like why this decision was made. I'm not going to get into all of it now. Save it for some video in the future, probably when we do Final Fantasy 12 as a podcast series. But I actually have sort of reversed my stance on this whole who the POV character of 12 should have been and whatnot. I actually think it's brilliant that you play as Rex in the intro and not as Bosch.
And then also Vaughn.
Even that, but we're saving that for later.
That's fine.
Well, for now, we'll just talk about intro. The reason why is because the entire mystery of the intro is why would Bosch do this? Why would Bosch betray Dalmasca like this? Right? Because you play as this recruit. This is your captain. You're going in, and the whole thing was set up. Bosch turns on you at the end and then kills the king.
Right.
And so the king of Dalmasca. So it's like, oh my goodness, my captain betrayed me. Why have you done this? Well, if you remember, Rex doesn't just die in that scene. He's the lone witness to say it was Bosch who killed the king of Dalmasca. You are playing as the witness that puts Bosch into prison wrongfully. So you are, as the audience, what the director is doing with this scene is essentially setting you up like a juror to cast judgment on Bosch for having done this when he wasn't the one to have done that. You were there. You saw it.
Right.
You saw him do it.
Right.
Just like this other kid did, Rex, right? But in reality, that's not what happened. It's almost this pulling the rug out from under you as a witness to what happened, that even you got it wrong, even though you were in the room. You missed this one detail. And it is so brilliant how they pulled this off. We're going to put a spoiler warning for Final Fantasy 12 at this point. These are all going to be time-coded so that you'll be able to skip ahead. But this is what ends up making it so brilliant for me. There is a slight difference. Just slight, in the face of Bosch and his twin brother Galbranth in the story, right? Galbranth is the one who really kills the king.
Right.
Galbranth sets his brother up to take the fall for this when he's really the one who did it. And they are twins, and they have very, very, very similar faces, but they are not exactly the same. and this is true of twins too. You get like really close and really look at the details.
Yes.
From afar, it's like they're identical. They look the same.
Yeah.
But there are slight differences. They're not, and especially I think the older they get, they're going to start growing a little differently and developing a little differently.
It's really funny to be around like young twins.
Yes.
And to open a picture album or something with them. I actually had this experience last year. And for them to be laughing and saying, haha, that's you. Look at you doing this. And you, as the adult, being like, how do you know that wasn't you? You look the same. But they don't look the same to each other. No. They can easily see the difference. And to see them laughing and pointing at pictures and saying, oh, this is you. Obviously, come on, everyone, this is you. That looks nothing like me.
Yeah.
And then for everyone else to be like, okay, it's just a really fun experience.
Yeah. So when you it's almost one of those things where you've played the game, you go back through it again, you see it.
I have not yet replayed 12. I've only played it once.
When you are looking at Bosch's face, because Bosch and Galbranth are there.
Right.
Bosch is the one who you talk to as Rex, right? At the very beginning, he gives you a little bit of tutorial on the battle system and stuff. That's Bosch. But when you get into the room, and he's dressed exactly like him, but that is Galbranth's slightly different character model face.
Very interesting.
Not Bosch's.
Very interesting.
And you go, oh my goodness. But you were the witness, just like Rex was. Mm-hmm. And you were left alive specifically to say, he was the one, Your Honor. He murdered him. I saw it.
Right.
He betrayed me. He fatally injured me, and he killed the king or whatever. And it's like, that's indisputable. It's like there's no I was there, I saw it.
See, maybe
but you didn't understand this one thing.
Maybe the pulling out the rug is part of why while I still loved it, didn't see it exactly the same way that you did. Instead, I saw the intro as, wow, this is a dope intro where we saw this thing happen and this is what happened, and it goes. And then later on, I feel like, oh, they're going to rewrite the intro. Now I have to change my opinion on the intro 20 hours into the game because they've added new info that makes the intro completely different. And I have not yet replayed the game since that new additional info has kind of been added. But also just kind of the general idea that sometimes video games don't do those subtle changes and it's just cheap. It's like, but they look exactly the same.
Yes.
Now you're saying that if you look, there are subtle differences. And that's where I'm like, oh, dang it. I want to go back and look now.
Look at it now.
It will feel different when I play it again, I'm sure.
When we play it for the podcast, I won't point this out in the episode, but like we will have looked at that. And I think, well, I'm not going to speak for you, but for me, going through that a second time, it was like, oh, wow, that's actually really, really cool. Yeah. The way that they have just that subtle difference that if you knew what to look for, you would know, nope. Yeah. But like, I don't know.
It would make the intro better.
Matsuno is brilliant in that. I'm sure and his attention to detail is meticulous.
Yeah.
And so like that is the kind of attention to detail he puts in there.
That he would do.
And then you go back and look at it and go, oh yeah, I was wrong. I was the witness and I was wrong.
I love that because it also presents the question, if I can't trust my eyes, what can I trust?
What can you trust?
And I
that's
like
very much a Matsuno thing too.
Yeah.
He writes stories that show the human flaws in perspective all the time.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I love about his writing is all of his characters are flawed. All of them have these perspectives that you can see the holes in them. Yeah. And he essentially turned you in the intro into that.
Right.
And I just thought that was really, really well executed.
Brilliant.
So I love FF12's intro for that reason. Now, as the seventh, now we're getting into the top half of this.
Okay, FF12 spoilers are over, everybody.
Yes, we're to Final Fantasy Tactics now. And it's going to be similar. We probably don't even need to spend that much time on it. Matsuno's intros are strong because he is an incredible director. He writes and paces and like shows you what he wants you to see and just sort of like crafts this world that just makes you go like, man, this is cool. This is intriguing. There's something going on here.
That's especially true in FF Tactics.
Yeah. And so, this is essentially, again, sort of like a history was written by the victors But let me show
yes,
you
of
what
course.
really happened.
All right, yeah.
So that's like how the narrator like leads it off, right?
Or is it Emma Durai?
The Durai Papers.
Yeah.
Which is like a document that's going to show you what actually happened with this heroic King Delita from the past.
Yeah.
He's not the guy you thought he was. There was actually this other character who's been forgotten in history, and this is what really happened. And people were killed or burned at the stake for trying to reveal this information in the past.
Right.
And now, like, I'm going to try to get the truth out there. But again, it's this difference of perspective. You have these two friends who went different paths to achieve an ends, and it's like, do the ends justify the means kind of question thrown into that. But, you have Ramza, who hasn't seen Delita, presumed he was dead. He's working as a mercenary now. They're there at a monastery, and he's there sort of like escorting or guarding the princess. And then Delita shows up, his friend from, years ago, and sort of kidnaps her. And it's just, it introduces mysteries behind like what really happened in the past.
Then I believe this is still part of the intro, but where you learn very shortly after there that the people who attacked actually were wearing the opposite sides uniforms, right? And so
false flag operations everywhere.
Totally, yes. I mean, well, it's an effective way to do things if you're in control enough to pull it off. Yeah. It's an effective way to change the people's perceptions on what really happened, right?
Yes.
And so this is kind of showing how there's multiple different factions or kind of positions or perspectives that you could take depending on who is in power or not. Anyways, it's really fun. It's a very good intro for the game in general because every battle you have, there's going to be some revelation kind of towards the end of it of like, you think you know the truth. You think you know what you're doing, don't you? And then you like kill the person. Of course I do. And then you keep moving. And the more that happens throughout the game, the more you kind of begin to second guess. But based on the intro of the game, as the game player, you already know basically this was a false flag and there's weird stuff going on, right? Yeah. And then you're going to kind of figure out exactly what that is later on. But they set it up right from the beginning for you to start kind of questioning things as you're going.
Yeah. I think this is really at the front or sort of nails down for me what I love about Matsuno's writing and particularly about his intros is you're shown an event, but a lot of times you're not sure that what you just watched or what you saw is like the real story. Right. You feel like you're missing some context.
But not in a bad way, though.
No, it's in a way that makes you go,
didn't tell me enough.
I got to go find out more now.
Exactly.
I'm going to play this game. That's almost the mysteries behind like how he crafts his intros. And so
brilliant.
Tactics was really great on that account. At number 6, we have Final Fantasy 16.
16.
Now, this is one, again, we maybe disagreed a little bit. I might have dropped this below the previous two, but you had your reasons you explained. And so we settled on this, but it is what it is. It was a strong intro.
It was a very good intro.
If not only for the fact that it evokes Lord of the Rings imagery, right?
Oh, absolutely. Very Lord of the Rings style. Yeah. I do remember also the intro is more or less just the demo of the game before the game came out. You play the demo. Yes. It was basically just the first hour or two of the game. And that is based on that alone, before having played the game, when we had just played the demo, it was exciting. Yeah. We were like, this is...
Oh, man.
FF is back, baby. Yeah, like that kind of stuff.
People were calling this the best Final Fantasy intro of all time based on the demo.
Still wouldn't have
I wouldn't have agreed at that point.
But it was so good. But it was promising.
My point is, yes, it set people up for this idea that, wow, I think there's something really, really special here.
Yeah.
It sort of set that expectation right from the start. The Ifrit and Phoenix battle as they're falling through
really something
like the depths of the earth.
Yeah,
and you have
Balrog, Gandalf
exactly
style.
What it felt like. And some people might say, "Oh, that's just ripping it off."
I don't care.
Listen,
rip that scene off all you freaking want, dude. Please.
All of the things that you love, especially for people in our channel who love Xenogears so much, you got to understand how much is influenced by other things.
Yeah, I mean, like
even
Lord of the Rings is influenced by other stuff.
Xenogears is just straight up 2001: A Space Odyssey in a lot of ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're going to call that a montage, but you're going to call this ripping off. I mean, I really want to know where the line is drawn between the two.
Yeah.
But no, I thought it was really exciting and really beautiful. And of course, very, very strongly gut-punchingly emotional for this character who watches his and is essentially the one killing his own brother.
Oh yeah, that was
rough. Like ripping him apart, limb by limb, kind of a deal.
Yeah,
like it was just it was really heavy, heavy in a way that like Final Fantasy 15 almost promised to be in all of its marketing, but then ended up being like
a little more like
pushing a car around and trying to go like find parts to get it fixed. Where it's like here, it's like you're like murdering your own brother against your will, like you just like went berserk and like lost it, kind of a deal.
It was very emotional. It did endear me to the characters quite a bit, and also they were able to really show you kind of your relationship with the father as well, and the court at large, and the person who's helping train you. I can't remember his name. They do a good job of really giving you those relationships and those connections. The intro of the game was something special. It was really special, and it got us both very excited to actually play the game.
Yeah.
And to that end, it's like it accomplished its goal. It was a great hook, and it used the right imagery for us in particular, and really fun.
Yeah, it was good. Okay, now we're into the top 5. This is where it really gets to another level. Yeah. I feel like at this point going forward, like these are some of the best video game intros, period, of all games. At number 5, we have Final Fantasy IV.
FF4,
that music with like the airships flying in, and the captain,
the Red Wings,
Cecil, the Red Wings,
the Detroit Red Wings.
He's there dejected at what he's just done. You see these flashes of how he went to these other neighboring kingdoms and just stole their crystals.
Being a bully,
not only stole them, but probably killed some innocent people in the pursuit of doing so. It's very heavily implied that that's what happened.
Yeah.
He's a dark knight. That's his job, his class, right?
Yeah.
And he just feels totally guilty for this. And at the moment that he decides to question the king, who raised him, by the way, took him in as an orphan and raised him, and is now sending him on these missions that he feels so conflicted about. And he's conflicted between his loyalty to basically his father, his adopted father, who he knows and felt was a good man his whole life, versus what he knows he's doing.
Right.
And the one time where he raises just the question, are we sure that we're doing the right thing here? Please explain yourself, please. He's demoted and he's sent right off on a mission, basically to go deliver destruction to another town on a scale that's even worse than what he had just done.
That's right. I remember that, yeah.
And so like he doesn't realize that's what he's going there to do. And then, of course, you have Cain sort of like kind of stepping in for his friend and being like, no, your majesty, please don't do this. And so like, well, if you're going to talk back, like you're going to go as well. Yeah. And so the two of them as friends heading off together, to do this heinous, heinous thing they don't realize they're about to do. And then of course you have Rosa put into all this. She's expressing how worried and how much she loves Cecil. And I'm not even worthy of your love at this point. I'm so despicable. It really sets up this redemption story for Cecil in a way that, again, is just directed so well. And I especially love in the DS version where you have these cuts as Cain and Cecil are walking down the hallway towards each other, back and forth. And it's just like these two bros to the end, and that's even mixed into how crazy that ends up getting in the story. The conflicts there and the love triangle. But like you have these two bros who are like off to accomplish this mission. They have no idea what they're being sent to do, and it's so tragic. And how this basically just sets up Cecil as a main character, and how the music flares. You loved FF1's
that song.
That same music where you had
the text scroll
in FF1 the shot over the lake.
Yeah.
Here they have the text scroll of the
castle.
Yeah. And it has a very similar feeling to it almost.
Yeah.
But like the way they led up to that, into that moment where you just feel like, okay, we're setting off on another Final Fantasy adventure. And I'm locked in. It's so well directed. Yeah, it's so well directed.
The DS version of FF4 is really cool. I have not yet played it. Next time I play FF4, I'm doing the DS version. But I've only played the SNES version.
Yeah.
And it's just a little bit different, especially in the intro where you just see the airship kind of rolling up, just the 2D pixel art stuff. You don't see the FMV happening first. But it is really, it's just the idea of airships are so cool. Airships are really cool in general. The way the airships kind of work and the power that they have is really well shown here. And then, of course, you also are introduced to the Red Wings, which if you're going to kind of turn against what the king's wishing right now, then you're also kind of turning against the Red Wings. And they built up the Red Wings to be something like really cool, like a really elite force. And so now it's like you're off on your adventure, and depending on how things go, you might be up against that, right? And it's formidable because not only, so the intro serves the purpose not only of kind of hooking you to the game, but also introducing you to the elite squad of these, you know,
the Red Wings,
like these people. And not only for the purpose, kind of FF7 does this too with Soldier, right? It's not just because this is the group you're part of, but also because these are some people you might end up against later on. Very, very cool way to set that up.
Yeah, for sure. It's great. But is it as great as number 4 on the list, which is Final Fantasy VI?
FF6, oh my gosh. And the way they do those intro credits with that music. The reason FF6 ranks so high in my mind is not just because of that Magitech intro that even though the suits look different, they still went with because it was so dope, right? But it's also because of the symbolism, right? You've got the cloud kind of moving down with that sort of like Bach organ, you know, playing as you're dropping all the way down to show the turmoil amongst the clouds, you know, leading down to the potential turmoil on the ground. And the way that it all comes together, especially where you see Terra and then the people who are kind of like, don't let her out of your sight. You know, we're here to do one job, and she is a mind controlled or something like that, right? Do they reveal that?
Yeah. So
they reveal that
right away.
Right?
The soldier walks up and says, "Oh, with that, crown on her head, she'll do whatever we say." Basically, because they're like, "Oh, didn't she kill like all of these soldiers?"
I see.
Like,
that's part of
training exercise back there. Like, I'm a little bit worried about this witch. She's kind of like nuts. Like, I'm a little.
It's like, don't worry. Here. This thing will never go wrong. It's like HAL 9000. It will never glitch out. It will never go wrong. Never will it make a mistake. And what's really good is that after that exchange is when you then see them walking forward with the credit scroll.
Right.
So they talk about all this destruction, and then you know, okay, they're about to go waste something, right? But they make you wait like 2.5 minutes. Of just walking as the town that you're about to destroy, or that you don't really destroy the whole town, but you cause problems and you kill people as it slowly rises up on the horizon. And you feel kind of that suspense, right? Like, when are the credits going to stop, and when is this thing going to happen?
Yeah.
It just slowly builds, and the song is just playing, right? It's nothing crazy happening, but it's a really cool CG intro with the 2.5D kind of thing that the SNES was capable of doing later on in its life.
Talking about mode 7 with
the chip.
With the
Star Fox chip.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you're just kind of like, I don't know when it's going to happen. When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? So instead of just being like an FMV sequence you watch, or like just nothing's happening for a while, it feels very suspenseful because all the while you feel yourself getting closer and closer and closer, and you can just feel the suspense, right, until you finally get there. And it doesn't feel too long at all, in my opinion.
No.
It's just, I'm a fan of long drawn out one takes, right, like single shots.
Yeah.
This one did a brilliant job with that.
Yeah, and like, you know, I think almost one of my favorite parts is like the title reveal at the very beginning. You just have these clouds and this organ playing. It's just building. It's just this lightning that comes out.
And I mentioned too, there is a bit of a 2001 Space Odyssey connection there with the song that plays.
Yes.
Being the Also Sprach Zarathustra, right?
Thus spoke Zarathustra, yes.
Yes, well, yeah, that's the German, I guess. Also Sprach is.
Yeah.
But that you get that. So when I talk about these long drawn out shots, I am also referencing 2001 A Space Odyssey and saying that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
That the suspense just builds as you have these long drawn out one take single shots happening.
Yeah.
There's probably multiple references to 2001 there, a movie that we both just watched.
Yes, and we're going to be doing
and we're going to be talking about it on Patreon.
Yep.
Yeah.
FF6's intro is interesting because like not as much technically happens in it as say like FF4 we just talked about.
Sure. Yeah,
FF4,
that's true.
like all of this stuff happens. You have like the captain who like goes and steals all these crystals. He's stripped of his rank. His buddy, he and his girlfriend are having problems because he feels so guilty. He doesn't even feel worthy of her love. They're sent off on this mission. They go and like kill all these freaking like summoners over here. It's just like a lot of things happen in a short space of time. And it's like, it's not quite as packed FF6 is as, in terms of like things that happen there.
No,
but there is again, just a mastery of the use of all of the component elements coming together for something that just pulls you in.
Yeah.
It's the music being timed with the reveal of the title, and then like showing you these images where you like get these just little glimpses of Kefka walking around there in the Empire and whatnot. Sort of setting up this sort of foreboding feeling of what's to come.
Yep.
And essentially you're going here you're not one of the good guys. Let's just put it that way.
And you know that basically right away.
Yes. And so like as they're marching and you're just, this town is sort of like coming up, there's just this foreboding sense, this melancholic foreboding sense that FF6 really like masters in terms of the emotion that it's sort of like embraces. There's this sadness to it. There's this longing, almost like this foreboding that you can't quite do anything to stop.
You're right.
And there's something represented there in the whole like slave crown thing.
Yes.
It's like she can't control she can't stop what's about to happen. And there's almost this whole sense for the whole game that's you can't stop what's coming.
As you keep playing, and with the opera and then multiple scenes later on, it's like, yes, this melancholic feeling is kind of weighing over the entire game.
Yeah.
There's a quote from the book The Histories by Herodotus, written a very long time ago, that says the most cruel aspect of being human basically is to know so much, yet to not ever be able to change anything. Ever,
yeah.
Right.
Yes.
That the fates and the gods will do. Things will play out as they will. And it's almost worse off for humans that we just know so much, yet still can do nothing to stop fate.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like something like that is what's playing out through FF6, is that just like you don't have control over this. And everything you try and do, it's like you don't have control over what's happening here.
Yeah. And it just sort of establishes that sense in you kind of right off the bat, and it sort of leads you into where it's going. Does a really great job. Number 3, we're into the top 3 here. Final Fantasy IX.
Yes, FF9.
It's another one where
the swashbuckling adventure returns.
Fun.
Yeah.
It's this fun sense of adventure. It's this more lighthearted, charming, like Final Fantasy sort of pendulum swang, I guess, back and forth between these feelings. And FF6 was more depressing and melancholic.
7 was too.
7 was more that way.
8 was a little less so.
Yeah, 4 was more that way. 5 was really lighthearted. So this kind of goes back to 5 and that 3. Kind of feeling. But man, is it exciting at the same time.
Yeah.
You have a heist. It's a heist.
It's a heist.
And heists are, they're fun.
Heists are fun. It strikes a chord right off the bat. It kind of lets you know at the very beginning when that very first battle happens, right? It's a person wearing a costume. Right?
Yes.
It's like the director of Tantalus. He's got a dragon costume, and it's kind of obvious a little bit, sort of, that that's what it is. But he jumps out of the room that he's in, basically. And it's like he roars, and you're like, oh no, let's fight, and fight. And then, oh, it turns out, oh, good job. I scared you there, didn't I? Like, just a costume. That is a little bit of an example of the lightheartedness. You don't know what to expect when you're here, right? You start the game, you're kind of walking around, you don't know what to do, you're exploring, and then boom, a dragon jumps out. But it's just a dude joking around with you wearing a dragon costume. And that's perfect. I actually really like the very beginning of the game and that very first battle that you have, because it sets up the characters, it sets up the fact that you're an actor, right? You're just playing a role. These are the costumes. You're here for a reason. Everyone kind of gets together, right? Like we're actually thieves, right? We're going to steal stuff, but there's something really fun about it. Like it just feels really fun. And they let you know right from the very beginning of the game what this is going to be like. And then of course, throughout this intro scene, you also have that stage performance where you've got to push the buttons in the right order at the right time. It's really hard to do actually to get like get a really high score.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's extreme. I've never gotten above like, is it out of 180 or something like that? But the way that they use this acting kind of, we're just characters in a play. We're just actors, trying to do stuff behind the scenes. The way that it comes through in the gameplay is really fun and really cool. And then you have Queen Brahme with like her like Joker, like the Jokers next to her, but then also Steiner and Beatrix. Beatrix. And just the way the characters look too. Zidane has a tail. Now, some people really don't like that. I get it. I was like that. I was in the camp of, why does he have a tail? I wish he didn't have a tail.
Well,
this game's stupid because he has a tail.
Designs overall, like the faces.
Yes, they look a little more.
They're a little. I don't know. I don't know what word to use. This isn't the right word, but they kind of look creepy. Like their eyes.
They do. They look more like claymation, maybe.
There's just something in the face.
Yeah.
These are not like
Steiner,
he's got the sunken eyes. Like model-esque characters like FF8 or something like that.
Yeah, you're right. It's less anime.
And it doesn't look as anime as FF7. So there's something a little bit off-putting to me about the character design.
And Queen Brahme especially. Originally, what in the world is going on with her? Like that was very freaky, especially when she's smiling and clapping and watching the play. Like, I'm just like, oh, that just freaks me out. I don't know what happened to this person to get them to look that way, but it's not a good thing. But at the same time, all the characters look weird and kind of screwed up, right? And I actually, I really like it.
For me, what really makes FF9's stand out, particularly from its direct like predecessors, was that it was going all in on the theatrical presentation.
Yes.
And I think even the way the characters look, there's a lot, almost like a eyeshadow makeup kind of like look to them. They look made up in the way that a stage actor looks. If you look at a stage actor close up, the makeup looks kind of like it's overdone and sort of almost creepy looking.
Yeah.
But that's because you got to see that from like
farther away.
The third row or the third balcony.
Yeah,
you have to kind of be able to see certain features and be able to read their faces, and so that's why it's overdone on the stage. And so and Final Fantasy's
I get that feeling.
Presentation for 1 through 6 was theatrical.
Right.
It was made to it was specifically like the idea behind it was little dioramas where these little dudes run around on these little dioramas that are built, and they perform like stage actors.
Like
they're very big and expressive with their emotions.
Yeah.
And it's like you're looking at it from afar, like a stage. Final Fantasy VII was a bit split on that account. It was almost like half the team wanted this to feel very cinematic, and half the team wanted it to feel more classical and theatrical.
Right.
And so they kind of just did a direct split where you have your chibi models for certain cutscenes, and you have like your higher poly models and very cinematic sequences, and they kind of just like compromised on that. And then the team split, and FF8 and 10 and 13 went all in on the cinematic approach
the more realistic
to its presentation, and Final Fantasy IX was all back again to its theatrical roots.
Even to the extent of Tantalus performing a play at the very beginning of the game.
It is literally a play.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
And they've built that into their heist where they're like part of the performance.
Yeah.
And then you have like you get to Garnet, and then you're there to kidnap her.
Yeah.
That's like the heist. But she wants you to do it.
I know,
like,
that's a cool twist. I love that.
Like twists and turns, and then like the swashbuckling nature of like the swinging on the ropes, and it's the airship escape and then get shot down. It is incredibly exciting. It has that classic sense of adventure that is presented with this very theatrical way.
Yeah,
that felt like a return to form for the Final Fantasy series in a way that had all of its success. Well, not all of it, but like it became a household RPG because of FF7, and then FF8 on the back of that. It seemed like it was going this hard turn into, we're going for a cinematic, more realistic sort of presentation for this series. And FF9 was like, no, we're going back to what this was created to be, or what it was in the mind of its original creators.
Yeah.
And again, that pendulum swing that it tended to do in between titles. I don't know. It was just, it's so charming. Yeah. It's so charming and fun. And at the same time, just exciting. And I just love it.
Me too. And the FMVs don't look that different from the actual gameplay. And maybe that was another reason for designing the characters the way that they did, is so that the FMVs and the actual gameplay, there's not as big of a discrepancy.
Yes,
maybe like there was in FF7.
Right.
FF8 did a pretty good job of splitting that one as well, but I think 9 does a better job of, not to say that the FMVs necessarily look better, although I think they do. I think 9 does have the best FMVs, but that they don't. It's not so jarring when you're going from gameplay to cutscenes.
Agreed.
Very cool.
All right. Final Fantasy X is the one we've put at number 2.
Final Fantasy X.
I didn't used to feel this way. I used to feel, because we have like Final Fantasy, at least in our list, we had Final Fantasy 8 and 13 a little bit further down on the rung.
Yeah.
And I used to feel, especially like the first or maybe even second time I played Final Fantasy X, that this sort of like branch of the Final Fantasy dev history, where Kitase and his group were kind of like doing things this way. Yeah. I was like, their games are not like to my personal taste. Like, again, all of these games are good. They really are all very, very good. Yeah. But I kind of separated the Kitase-led Business Unit 1 sort of like Final Fantasies into a different camp. And I sort of preferred the Sakaguchi-led stuff. Until we played Final Fantasy X for our podcast series. Yeah. And it was actually you who ended up changing my mind about so much in regards to my opinions of Final Fantasy X. So we just talked about a little earlier how maybe the priorities behind what those set of creators are trying to evoke in their storytelling are more like just emotionally focused. We're trying to like use our images and our music to sort of create a feeling and emotion, and really like focus strictly on that. And maybe like some of the logical parts are not as set as much of a priority, like in a Matsuno game, where it's like the details and the logic behind why characters make the decisions they make are really important. But maybe it's not so much here. And maybe for somebody with my proclivities, tended to prefer one over the other.
Okay.
But in Final Fantasy X, it is so clear, and this is even stated by some of the developers. Why am I blanking? Nomura.
Oh, yeah.
Nomura had talked about his designs in the past being something that's just, I'm just trying to create something that looks and feels really cool.
Yes.
But in FF10, he got really purposeful with the symbolism.
Right.
Why am I putting this symbol on the clothing? Yeah. Why am I designing them this way? There was a lot more thought and purpose put into it that you really pulled out of all of that for me. That was like, this is actually really, really excellent.
Right.
And the intro is full of that. So while it has the same sort of abstract imagery, a lot of times this almost dreamlike feel to it. Wink, wink.
Very good. Very good.
It's still all really has a purpose and is like very, very thoughtfully placed for payoffs later that make it quite possibly, arguably, the strongest. Obviously, on our list, it's not, but the strongest intro in the whole series.
Yeah, it's wild. This is one of the things where after I watched it and was really looking for the meaning in the beginning of this game here, I actually sent the intro to this game. I don't talk to my younger brother that often, Parker. I don't talk to him as often anymore as I used to. We still talk every now and then, maybe a couple times a year, but really not that often. I texted him the link to the intro to this game, and was just like, dude, this is freaking wild. You just got to check this out. It's not that long, like 20 minutes, and you got the gameplay and then the intro, and then you can like go to the part where everything kind of gets sucked up into the black hole that appears there.
Yeah.
And I sent this to him because I was just like, I just had to share it with somebody.
Yeah.
I just felt like somebody else needs to know how absolutely like off the hook crazy and exciting and fun this intro is. And it's almost the cherry on top, or the icing on the cake in general, that it all actually means something too, right? Like this is a cool, exciting, really fun, dope intro, whether or not the symbolism is involved or not. But the fact that all of this stuff is like direct reference, or this is the kind of thing where, yeah, you're just kind of watching for parts of it, right? You're not playing, at least for the cutscene parts. You don't forget what happened there 20 hours into the game. You don't forget any of that stuff. The massive tidal wave coming up to just completely cover Xanarkand is like that imagery just it haunts you. It's going to haunt you for years, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so creepy. And not only that, as it's happening, Auron is just like staring at it, and he just like kind of raises his jug to it basically as gravity is reversing. It's one of the coolest, most intriguing things I've ever seen. It is really, really cool.
So we've talked about like Matsuno is like this masterful director who sort of like is logistically building this story layer upon layer. And he got like the political factions and like just all of this stuff that just like hooks together and is clearly well thought through in terms of its logic behind the story, right? And then you have like this group of creators who more of the Kingdom Hearts style. It's just abstract imagery.
Right.
It's evoking a feeling, but like you're not meant to really like take it so literally.
Yeah.
And what's so great about Final Fantasy X is it marries those two styles to perfection.
Extremely well.
Because you're talking about these things that happen. Auron sort of raising his jug to this approaching disaster.
Yeah.
That's not just a cool shot. That has extreme purpose.
Yes.
That means something in the story. That's a hint. That's a clue. And the intro is full of them. It's like literally everything you're being shown is for a very specific reason. It is setting up something extremely important thematically for the story.
Yeah.
And it's like you get the best of both in one thing, which is so rare to see. It's like you get this, what feels like dreamlike logic, and just like none of this makes sense, but yet it all does.
Yes, I know. That's
it's
craziest
not
part.
just abstract imagery to evoke an emotion. It's also got this really strong, well thought reason behind why it's there.
Yeah,
and it's masterful the way that it marries those two things together, those two styles. And I didn't see so much of it even after one or two playthroughs, kind of like Xenogears we talked about last time.
Yeah. Got to play at least 3 times.
You played it 3 times and you're looking at it and really analyzing. It's like, oh, wow, they thought of it all.
Yeah.
This is all important. It's all relevant. It's all setting up big payoffs. And it's just masterfully executed and incredibly mysterious. And
the music too is wild.
Fantastic.
I actually, I used to be, I haven't listened to them in forever, but I'm a big fan of the Black Mages, right? Their first studio album was really good. The second one, I feel like it was the first, I can't remember which one, the first or the second album that they put out had this song in it. And it was actually one of my least favorite songs on the album. I had not played 10. I didn't play 10 until quite a bit more recently, maybe just 5 or 6 years ago was when the first time I played 10. And then again for the podcast, of course. But the lyrics, and the way that they did it for the Black Mages is they got rid of like the death metal screamer and they put in a woman singing. Which like, go fast if you want it to bite the hands that feed you. And I'm like, that I didn't like it. I'm like, the guitar was cool. It was like really dope. But as soon as the singer starts singing, I'm like, oh, this is FF10. I don't know. I'm probably not going to play that game. This isn't a great song. You know, the music for Final Fantasy I often experienced before the game. Yeah. OC remixes and all of that kind of stuff. You know,
OC remixes.
Like I was familiar with Chrono Trigger's the entire soundtrack before I ever played that game. Right. But Final Fantasy X was like this. The few songs I had heard, I was like, these are pretty cool. But that one song, it just irks me. But when I love it now, because when that song plays in the intro and you've got the Blitzball game happening and the guitar starts really, like powering up as soon as the lights turn on for the Blitzball thing. And Tidus kind of like looks up and anyways, it's just like boom. And then the crowd's cheering, everyone's going crazy. And the way that the singer masks the lyrics. I think it's actually very important that he's masking what's actually being said due to his gruff voice. So that instead of hearing the specific words, you're just getting, like you said, you're just getting that feeling. There's an electric, it's excitement in the air at the same time that this freaking wild thing is happening. And the heavy metal music playing during this attack just adds to almost the dreamlike nature of this whole thing. Like
feelings.
You would think that there'd be like some epic music soundtrack, some like Hans Zimmer type sounding thing, here. But instead it's this like heavy metal band playing, almost like as the world is breaking, that they're still performing a concert. I almost feel like a lot of heavy metal bands put on that type of act on their concerts, right? Where it's like, everything's breaking, like, this is the rock of Armageddon, right? A lot of rock music is about Armageddon, like Iced Earth has that dope song Framing Armageddon, which is just like freaking off the rails. But then also
I forgot about Iced
the
Earth,
idea, Iced Earth, dude, I'm bringing it all up now. I have not listened to basically any heavy metal music in a very long time, by the way. But I remember this stuff. This is stuff that heavy metal does go along very well with, like, destruction and the end of the world. And I feel like it was actually the perfect song to use here as well. And we're talking about the cutscene right now, but the gameplay too, especially as you're walking past that building with Jack's face on it that kind of like falls towards you. Like, there's so much purposeful, really cool stuff that happens in the gameplay as well, up until that point where Auron reaches his hand down to you saying, come, we're going into this thing. Like, it culminates in that moment. It's so exciting. Like, I have goosebumps right now just talking about it and just thinking about it, because I cannot imagine a single way that could have been done better. So good.
It's like we got to move on to our number one here. We could talk about this forever. But it's like all of the things that I typically, I don't want to say don't like, but like the reason why this style of storytelling usually doesn't like completely resonate with me a lot of times is because it feels like it's imagery meant to evoke mystery, but like maybe there's not necessarily the answers to that mystery that you think they're going to be. Kingdom Hearts is a great example of this.
Yes.
They've been like stringing forever what the fetch is even happening.
I thought
what is Kingdom Hearts, and they just keep stringing you along. Like, it's just a mysterious feeling sequence without a real answer there, right? It's just kind of like, again, it's emotion evoked without like,
and the emotions are powerful.
Yes, without something there that I feel confident they're actually going to answer about it.
Yeah, after playing 3, that I now feel the same way. I used to feel like, no, they're going to get there, man. They're going to get there. After playing 3 is when I've kind of fallen off the excitement for the Kingdom Hearts games, at least in part because I'm like, you're right, they're never doing this. Nomura is going to die, and we'll never know what any of this was like pointing towards.
It's not the same as sort of the mystery box storytelling that I'm not a fan of with like Lost. It's not that, but it's like akin to it in a different way. It's adjacent to it, where it's like the mysterious dreamlike logic intro that like feels very mysterious, but like the substance of it is they don't even really have an answer for you.
Yeah, it almost feels like
for years they still haven't really like answered those questions.
And when they do answer some of them, you get the feeling that they came up with that recently.
Like it wasn't thought through from the beginning.
I love Kingdom Hearts. I really do. I've played almost all of the games except for maybe the most recent ones. I love Kingdom Hearts. Very, very cool stuff. But I can't deny that. I do feel a little strung along.
There's just this sense in this style of intro to where I typically go, I'm not sure I feel confident that they even know the answers to the mysteries they're posing. They're just posing mysteries to get me interested. So I go, oh yeah, but then like they want you to forget about that later, right? Like, don't think too hard about it. This is the total opposite of that, where it gives you all of the coolness and the evocative imagery and all of that, but they have very specific payoffs they're going to lead you into. And that's why, like, this is my favorite, my absolute favorite of this style, because it actually delivers on what it promises. In every respect. Not one single thing that you go, I wonder about that. I wonder about that. When you look at that intro, is not answered in the game later.
Right.
and it's answered in a way that's super satisfying.
In a very satisfying way,
it's tremendously
more important than
well
just
done.
answering questions is the way that it's done.
Yes.
And in FF10, the way that it's done is as good as the intro. Just put it that way.
100%. All right. Number
By the
one.
way, gotta also say, Kingdom Hearts are the first games, among the first games that I introduced to my children as they're growing up now. They have played. They're almost done with the third game now. So
nice.
I love Kingdom Hearts. And I excitedly, with glee, have introduced them to my children.
Yeah. Okay. Number one. Final Fantasy VII.
What else is left?
It's almost hard to put into words because it's almost been talked to death and like everyone's almost tired of hearing this. And we're going to put this as a short somewhere on like TikTok or whatever. And literally people come out of the woodwork to talk about how overrated it is. Right? Like whatever. If you guys want to play that game, play it. I don't give a shit.
It's fine.
But I think what impresses me the most about it, on top of, again, it's just impeccable direction. Again, the music, how it leads into its title reveal, how it's all this one shot from like one sector of the city into another sector of the city, almost just totally seamlessly, was totally mind-blowing scale-wise for a video game.
Yep.
The FMV itself was so impressive that you're just like blown out of your chair, jaw to the floor, just watching it from the way it's technically leaping from the previous generation
from
into this one,
FF6.
in the way that it's able to just create this massive scale right off the bat. But not only that, you have the threads of its book, what do you call it? Book endings.
Oh, yeah.
It's beginning and ending on Aerith's face and on sort of like this ethereal, sort of like moving through the stars.
Yeah, it feels like stars.
It's immediately setting up its sort of like theme of life and what does life mean and how are we going to set up what the sanctity of life is. It's all woven into that beginning. And then the way the music builds to that title reveal and then into an extremely exciting action sequence for the beginning is
off the rails,
impeccably executed. And then in addition to that, I think what's even the most impressive part of it is how it introduces a very complex world with very, very effective text. They don't do a lot of talking.
That's right.
But
you're right.
when they talk, they are saying a lot with that very limited text.
That's actually a very good point. And in some ways, Cloud and Barrett not really liking each other and getting along helps kind of further things in a better way because they only convey info that's necessary.
Yes.
And they get rid of all the superfluous, all the extra, they trim the fat so effectively, but in a way that's really believable because it's like, I don't like you. Just tell me what to do. Tell me why I'm here. And I'll give you my opinion. Like I'm here for a reason. Cut the
There's
crap,
so many layers of conflict.
So good. It's brilliant.
There's conflict between the characers in the same party. There's conflict in terms of what they're there to accomplish and why.
There's heavy
and the
conflict
scale
there.
of that and the stakes behind it are just massive. There's conflict within themselves about what they just did.
The environmental terrorism aspect.
Wait a minute. Is this really the right thing to be doing or not? There's conflict, just layers and layers of conflict here. And it's so complex, yet it's so perfectly understandable. There's not one moment where you're confused anywhere in the opening of that game.
That's a very good point.
And they are introducing so much stuff about the world. You are learning about Shinra and its stranglehold over as a corporation that like rules the world basically. And it's like military industrial complex and how it uses the planet's energy and how this is an environmental disaster and basically these characters and why they're involved and Cloud used to work for them, but
that's why he's there.
But like he's an expert and that's why they've hired him, but he's not necessarily in it for anything other than the money and he doesn't care about the reasons that they care. And then like even helping the player understand the city of Midgar, which is itself a complex place and it's this plate where like the rich people live and then the poor who are underneath it.
Yeah, and like there's good symbolism there too.
Symbolically what that represents and how all of this is saying something about the real world for a 10-year-old to be able to grasp that.
Yeah.
And for the first time in my life pool, they're saying something about the kinds of things I see on the news in this game. And they say all of that in this sequence that is no longer than 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how you play it.
Right.
And the fact that it is incredibly exciting and has some of the best music ever written for video games is just this melting pot that created something that for millions and millions and millions of players who were not RPG players.
Right, that's right. This brought in a whole bunch.
RPGs were a whole niche, small thing, a whole niche thing.
Yeah.
This was a mainstream thing. Everybody, no matter what your background, no matter how much you played games or didn't, no matter how into RPGs you were or weren't, no matter if you were a hardcore or casual type player, no matter if this was the one video game you played or one of the few, this left an incredibly lasting impression on its audience. And the intro was just, you could not put it down after that.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Technically, again, graphically, technically, music, story, direction, it hit on all cylinders right from the moment you fired it up, and it did not let go to the end.
I remember the day that you showed me that intro, and just there's something about the original FF7 intro and the way that Cloud jumps off of the train
so sick.
and lands on the ground that in the modern recreations of that exact scene have not been able to replicate. I don't know what it is, but when you see a 32-bit Cloud low polygon jump off of the train and do kind of a cartwheel, one-handed spring flip and then land, that is cool. And that when they do it with a super lifelike, CG Cloud, and then he does his little flip, tumbling somersault landing, that's just not as cool. And I don't know, I can't put my finger on it. But it probably has something to do with the fact that the low poly 32-bit system allowed you to imagine things a lot
Games
more.
demanded you to fill in the gaps and imagine the coolest possible version of this in your own head.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
That
modern
element,
games don't have as much.
has been lost. I don't even say lost in the sense that it's a bad thing. It's just that there was that was something that was true of games in this time. You were sort of filling in the gaps with your imagination and sort of you're reading the character's dialogue in the way that you imagine they would say it in your head.
Yeah.
And you don't have that. There's not as much creatively going on. Well, it's sort of the difference between films and novels, for instance.
Totally, yeah.
When you're reading the novel, you are creating that visually in your brain. You create what the characters look like to a certain degree. They're described, but there's a million different ways for a person to have blonde hair.
Yeah.
There's a million different ways for them to have blue eyes. There's a million.
Right.
So they can only go so far in describing it before you have to fill in the gaps.
And you're filling in most of the gaps.
Early games, you kind of also had to do that.
Right. You were also reading them.
That doesn't mean modern games are bad because those gaps are filled in for you more often than not. It just means that there was sort of this participatory action on behalf of the player where, again, you're going to just imagine the coolest thing you can think of. And so when then you see somebody's full-scale recreation of that, that's not the one in your brain as a 10-year-old. It's not the same. But that's not a bad thing. It's just an unfortunate reality of the form then versus the form now. And if you were there then and you're there now, it's just not going to align.
You're right. They're just going to miss.
Right.
Yeah. Suikoden 2's intro, when they're training at the military academy and their two guys are fighting each other. I think it's the two friends, the two characters. They're kind of sparring against each other and they're flipping around their sticks or whatever they're doing. I can't tell you how it feels. I can't explain it, how it feels to watch that and to be like, this is dope. This looks so cool. But if you were to really watch someone actually flipping things around like that, how it's just not as cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know why exactly, other than to say that the minimal info given to me through something like Suikoden
I know what you're saying.
or Cloud in getting off the train at the beginning of FF7, there's something about the low poly that just allows the magic to still be there
Yes.
in a way that I don't know what I was imagining in my head, but whenever I see it depicted in real life,
It's not
like
the same.
the Star Wars prequels with all the flipping lightsabers.
Yes.
It's just like I thought I wanted this. And maybe I didn't, right? I guess I didn't want this, but what did I want? I don't even know. It's hard to explain.
This can be wrapped up in the term abstraction.
Yes, totally.
There is an abstract way of getting across an idea, which you're not taking literally. It's just
it's more symbolic.
Subconsciously,
right?
you know it's not literal.
Yes,
But like you are getting the idea of it, the impact of it, the emotion behind it, without literally seeing it. And Final Fantasy at this time relied so much on abstraction for its presentation. Like one of my favorite examples in Final Fantasy VII is their jumping animation. They used it a lot. And they would use it for big expressions. They would just jump like really far, all the way to the other side of the room. And just like, boom, jump over here. And it's like this person's either really fired up or really excited.
Yeah.
But like, if you're going to show that in like realistic, grounded sort of like graphics like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, you can't do that anymore. You can't have Cloud jump across the room to represent what he's feeling.
And it's a shame.
And that's what I'm talking about, how there was this sort of split on the team between we want to make it cinematic. No, we want it to be theatrical. It was half theatrical, half cinematic in this game in a way that fortunately blended and worked. But like you could see how I can't have the character do this big giant like silly leap and me understand what that character's feeling. Now I got to see that in their eyes and facial animation.
What in the old times you used to get through a jump of the character's entire body higher than any human could ever jump, right? You now get through seeing a close-up of their face and they're raising one eyebrow.
Yes.
And it used to have to be conveyed by the entire body of the character jumping 10 feet in the air.
Perfect.
And now it's like a slight squinting of the eyes.
Yes. This is the difference.
That's wild,
between theatrical presentation and cinematic presentation.
But there's such a huge gap there. There's such a huge gap.
Final Fantasy VII is so interesting because it like threaded that needle almost at will. It would be in one instance it's theatrical, and then in the next instance it's this super cinematic sequence. And like
you didn't
that worked somehow. It's like you didn't bat an eye at it, you didn't question it, it just worked. And so that's tough now when you're bringing it to the modern audience in the remake project. It's like we're losing that whole thematic. Now
Cloud just needs to raise an eyebrow.
And so it's like, how do we then convey those emotions in the cinematic form? And so anyway, there was something, but what you're talking about with him leaping off the train and some of the big actions and things like that, it's like that was such a key element to its abstract presentation that like gave it its OG identity and spirit. And was such like a key role in its coolness factor that somehow was able to weave between those two presentational styles, and I don't know, just nail it every time somehow. Crazy.
It's almost like you got to capture that spirit in a different way. Don't have him do the thing that you saw in the game. It just has to be done a different way if you want to do it at all. And to that end, a Final Fantasy VII remake is impossible. That being said, they did it. They did a remake, and it exists, and you can go play it. But don't expect to feel the same way that you felt when you played the original.
Your expectations got to be right.
They have to be.
It's like this is not supposed to be an FF remake discussion, but almost by default, like just the form has changed, and by the form, it's like an adaptation.
Right. Exactly.
If you're adapting something for the stage versus something for film, you can't adapt those the same way.
You can't, or it's almost that translation. This harkens to the translation argument discussion we've been having
lost
lately,
in translation,
which is something along the lines of there is no one-to-one translation between two different languages. No. There's something close to it, but it's never exact, and you have to find ways, sometimes creatively, to convey that info to your language people, right? In a way that is going to miss some stuff. and that you just kind of have to be okay with
live with
right?
that.
That's because translation is technically impossible one-to-one, right? It's just not possible. But also that being said, and the other reason I bring up the remake is because now Cloud can just squint his eyes and that's it. Whereas before he had to make some very big motion. But the translation is just impossible, but somehow it's doable in your brain, right? The abstraction, you can translate something directly to your mind, but it's difficult to then express it to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VII is so good.
Yes, it is.
And the intro to that game is just so much fun. The only thing they should have done different is to not tell you to attack the scorpion while its tail's up. That's probably the only thing that I would change about that intro to make it so that it's just hits and no misses.
That's funny too. I mean, that's a thing where it's like the mistranslation, this is common in FF games, is almost funny enough to where it's beloved, and now you almost have to keep it.
It's beloved, but you'd have to admit that if we're going to say that nothing should be done different, I don't know. There's maybe one thing that ought to have been done different, but that I'm okay with being as it is because it's nostalgic.
Because it's nostalgic.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for our list.
Yes. Did you like it?
Tell us why we're wrong.
Yes, tell us why
I expect literally everyone in the comments to tell me why I was wrong.
And a lot of people, give us your list. I totally will understand if FF8 is at the top of your list. I will not understand if FF15 is at the top of your list. So I'm just going to throw that out.
I will understand.
I'll give credence to 8.
I will understand if literally anyone puts any other game in the list at the top except Final Fantasy 15.
That's kind of the one.
That's kind of like the one where it's like, if you feel like that's the best intro in the series, you're going to have to make a great argument for me.
Yes, please, and make that argument if you can.
To follow you there.
Yeah.
But I could see the rest of them.
All the other ones, I can totally see it.
I can see the rest of them.
And will not even argue with you.
Yeah. All right, dudes. We'll see you again next week. Appreciate you. Have a good one. Peace out.